I've just been looking at the notes I've done over the years, and the first thing I see is Army came to the house. We hid, and then later on I see that Noel's brother and his son had been killed by the Army in a bombing.
The Tangs are a Kiwi family whose daughter, son-in-law, and grandchildren are caught up in a civil war in Myanmar. The children aren't in school, they're all hungry, they're moving house to house every few days to escape the army and the very real threat of being killed. And they've been waiting in a New Zealand visa queue for more than 7 years, with more than 4,000 others, and very few getting through every year.
People have the sense of hope, but they're not sure if it's empty hope or, but they also don't want to give up on that. And then you've got family members who might be living in precarious or difficult circumstances in other parts of the world where they're also holding on to hope.
Kia ora, I'm Gwen McClure, and on The Detail today, the visa category that's meant to be a way for refugees to reunite with their families, but in reality is barely viable. We'll hear more about the Tangs later in the podcast, but a few basics first. There are 3 ways to get to New Zealand as an immigrant. The skilled category, for people who can do a job we need. The family category, that includes the partnership and parent visas. And the humanitarian category. In that humanitarian category, you have so-called quota refugees. There are 1,500 spaces a year for quota refugees. Then you have the Refugee Family Support Category, the RFSC. That's what today's podcast is about. Jay Marlowe is a professor of social work at University of Auckland, and he co-authored a report with the New Zealand Red Cross earlier this year on how this category works and how it doesn't.
So the Refugee Family Support Category provides a pathway for people that have come to New Zealand under a humanitarian pathway, so through the Refugee Quota Program, or perhaps they came to New Zealand as asylum seekers and were recognized as refugees. It provides a pathway for those people to sponsor a family member to come to New Zealand. But at a very high level, you could imagine someone that maybe comes to New Zealand. Maybe you've got a woman that comes with 3 dependent children, and maybe she has a brother or something like that. She might be able to sponsor over, and that provides an opportunity for one that would sort of mean that she's able to reunite with some of her family members, but also that might also help her to support those children as well. And I've lived in New Zealand for 15 years now, and I've worked in the refugee settlement space really all that time. And if I think about one of the main issues that I've heard within community, even within organizations that provide dedicated support to help people from refugee backgrounds settle, family reunification is often one of the most important, if not the most important topic that people want to address.
So the point of this category is it's about helping the people who are already here, who are trying to settle into life in New Zealand, to do that, to have their support systems and their family so that they can be New Zealanders and find fulfillment here. That's right.
So if we look at refugee resettlement, New Zealand, through its quota refugee program, at the moment settles 1,500 people a year. If we look at sort of global numbers and everything around the number of opportunities to resettle in places like Canada or the UK, Australia, New Zealand, it constitutes less than 1% of the world's total forcibly displaced people. So what that means is that 1% here, that less than 1% here in New Zealand is thinking about that 99% that might be elsewhere. And this pathway provides, a very small number of people, but again, opportunity for that less than 1% to have family members come to New Zealand and for them to embark on another life together.
This category has 2 sections, Tier 1 and Tier 2. Tier 1 is for people who have come here without any other adult relatives, like that mum with kids but no one else, who Jay used as an example. Obviously, she'll need the support of other adult family, not just with the kids or financially, but emotionally too, so it makes sense that she'd have priority. Tier 2 is for people who do have adult family here, but then have other family members they want to reunite with too. For example, the Tang family, who we'll hear about shortly. Tier 1 is always open for applications, but Tier 2 isn't. In fact, it's only been open twice ever, once in 2012 and once in 2017, both times for just a few days. And now there's a backlog of 6,000 people for the RFSC, including more than 4,000 people in Tier 2. And the line is barely moving. And those numbers barely scratch the surface.
Up until 2022, it was 300 people a year could come under the RFSC, the Refugee Family Support Category. So up to 300 people. In 2022, that went up to 600 people, and that is where that number remains now. So if we look at sort of 6,000 people that are waiting for reunification, that means that if we were to take no new applications for reunification, it would take us 10 years to clear that backlog.
And those are Tier 1 and 2.
That's Tier 1 and Tier 2. Most of those people are actually in Tier 2. In our report, we showed that in Tier 1, there's about 1,600 people that are either registered or have been invited to apply. And what that means is that because only 600 people per year can be accepted, that it's oftentimes that almost no one under Tier 2 can get through because there are too many people at the door, and Tier 1 gets to go through first. So what this means is that people that have applied under Tier 2, and they rightfully were able to do so, means that they themselves, but also their family members, are waiting in this indefinite limbo, not knowing if they might get a space next year or the year after or 5 years from now. And there's some people that have been in that position for 7 years.
And 7 years because the last time that Tier 2 even opened for applications was 2017.
Was 2017. Because the doorway is so small and the backlog is so big, it means that all those Tier 2 applications can't get through the doorway.
Those are people who applied in 2017.
That's right.
So anyone who's come here in the last 8 years hasn't even had an opportunity to apply for Tier 2. Is that right?
So no one has had the opportunity to apply for Tier 2 since 2017. The pathway for it has been shut down. And part of that was in 2017. It was open for a very short window. And I can't imagine that it will be open anytime soon again until there's actually reform in the system. The reality is that because Tier 1 is always open, if you get 600 applications, it likely means that there'd be very few, if any, Tier 2 spaces that could then be considered.
I know I'm stuck on this. I keep coming back to this, but this number of 6,000 people in the backlog is a little bit misleading, right? Because that was 6,000 people in the backlog who are actually in the system. Now it's been 8 years, since the last group had been able to apply. So we can reasonably assume there are a lot more people who would like to apply for this, who have family they'd like to bring here, who don't even, aren't even registered, or, we're not aware of them.
That's right. I mean, one of the things we say in the report is that it would be helpful to actually try to do some sort of analysis that could try to anticipate what some of those numbers might be. It would be a difficult piece of work to do. But, if we're thinking about reform in the system, having a sense of what that demand would be like, I think would be important to establish.
At the beginning of this podcast, you heard the voice of Caroline Forsyth. Caroline is talking to me today to tell the story of some of her friends, the Tang family, whose oldest daughter, son-in-law, and grandchildren are on this Tier 2 waitlist. Caroline met the mum of the family, Do Ta Tang, in 2022 when she started tutoring her in English. But the Tangs have lived in New Zealand since 2010 when they came here as refugees.
When they arrived in New Zealand, there were 5 children and mum and dad. So the mum and dad is Do Ta and Nor. John Paul was on the way, and he was born 6 weeks after they arrived, basically.
Why did they come to New Zealand?
Well, they come from Chin State, which is a state on the border with India in Myanmar. And the Chin people are Christians. They were proselytized in the 19th century, and they have been basically under fire from the Burma majority ever since independence. So when the family left, there was a long history of persecution. That's how they got refugee status.
So had they been able to escape into a bordering country?
They got to Malaysia, yes.
Malaysia, okay. But there was a hitch here because not all of their children came with them, right?
No, the eldest daughter had recently got married and was expecting her first child. And at that time, there was a civilian government, and the daughter and her husband opted to stay in Chin State.
But things have changed a lot since then. In February 2021, the military overthrew the democratically elected government.
We start in Myanmar, where there are reports that 2 major cities have been put under curfew.
MPs have been rounded up and communication blocked. The military announced a year-long state of emergency.
Since then, the country has been in civil war.
A military coup and mass protests squashed in bloodshed. In Myanmar, young men and women are going to war against the military dictatorship.
And then this March, a massive earthquake killed and injured thousands.
Rescue workers are searching for survivors tonight after an earthquake struck central Myanmar, so powerful that tremors were felt in neighbouring Thailand and in southwestern China.
Myanmar as a whole is a pretty awful situation with the civil war and the earthquake and forced conscription. But this is a family that, as I said earlier, also comes from a persecuted minority. They have been shaken down in Yangon, i.e. the army comes around and demands money or they will be sent to jail. And I have a photograph of that happening to neighbours. They're moving every second or third night to stay away from the army. They tried to flee to Thailand, but were not successful. And the other thing is that the army basically requisition kids to do stuff for them, even if it's just cleaning up in the army camp, that sort of thing. But, that's child labor apart from anything else.
So I want to understand where the Tangs started this visa process for the Refugee Family Support Category, where things are now.
Well, first of all, all the family here in New Zealand became citizens at the end of 2015. John Paul, the youngest, is a citizen by birth. And in 2017, for the second time, the Refugee Family Support Category was opened, and it was for three days. And apparently it was an absolute, I won't use a vulgar word on radio, but it was a very difficult period to get applications in. However, they got onto the first stage, which is being accepted as a sponsor. They accepted certain responsibilities for the family if they came out here. And, when I first met them, I was sort of counseling patients, the system will work. This is the bureaucrat in me talking. But of course, what happened was that during COVID, there was absolutely no movement. So you've got this dreadful backlog, and it's moving incredibly slowly. There are 4,000 people in Tier 2, and that was closed in 2017. And last year, they moved 146 people out of that category.
So as somebody who's watched this unfold for about 3 years, what do you think about this process? Do you think it's working? Do you think it's working fairly?
I think it was okay to start off with. It was a very good idea, but the backlog and the fact that Tier 1 people, that category is still being increased. So the people in Tier 2 keep on getting pushed further down the list, which is, appalling in my view.
Caroline says Dotau doesn't sleep much because she's so worried. And the RFSC is the only real pathway for her daughter and her family. They aren't refugees because they can't get out of Myanmar, though they have tried. Jay says the system needs work, and that lies with our government.
I think one thing that's important to say is that it's not our position that the RFSC is not working or is absolutely broken. I think it's really important to, again, emphasize the importance of this program and how it's enabled to connect people in ways that wouldn't be possible otherwise. For me, fundamentally, it's about, ensuring we protect what exists, but that also to recognize that it is under need of reform. It's not irreparably broken, but it does need reform. Really, the decision for that reform is largely a political one. I think that Immigration New Zealand would be equipped and able to help to address some of those things, provided that pathway was opened.
And what have we heard from the ministers in charge of the immigration portfolio on this?
So, in some ways, there are some encouraging signs, but there's also some frustration there in the sense that, there has been bipartisan recognition that this needs to be addressed and that it needs to be, that the fundamental right to family is something that's kind of sacrosanct and should be tried to be supported where possible.
Jay says the Refugee Alliance, which is a group of more than 40 organizations working in this area, has been asking for reform around the Refugee Family Support Category for several years. In the past, Associate Minister for Immigration Casey Costello has said that constraints around housing and healthcare here prevent them from increasing the numbers. Here's Labour MP Phil Twyford asking her for news on progress mid-last month at the Education and Workforce Committee hearing.
I wonder if you can give us an update on the Refugee Family Support Category and processing times, wait times, number of people in the queue. Please.
Okay, so we'll first start on the Tier 1. So the invitation to apply, the ITAs have been, so everyone currently in Tier 1 has received that ITA, so that is being worked through. The upside is that it looks like we will now be able to start opening some invitations in the Tier 2 category, which hasn't occurred for quite some time.
So some good news. Some Tier 2 applications coming off the top of the queue aren't far from being processed. But the bad news is that to clear the Tier 2 backlog will take 8 to 10 years.
In terms of people on hand, there is currently 951 registrations under Tier 2, which covers 4,190 people. It's constantly moving depending on how many Tier 1 applications we receive. So it's very hard to estimate or model how that will actually work through.
I think one of the things that we need to do to get greater government buy-in is to even think about what constitutes settlement success, but also to look at that from a longer-term standpoint. That likely, in the first few years, there will be additional resources that need to be dedicated to supporting that. But if we think about things from a medium to long term in terms of the positive benefits that might mean for the individual sponsors, but also maybe for their children, and what that might mean long term in terms of people's abilities to participate in the wider society and contribute in a number of different ways, that we might even see this as being a cost positive commitment. Not only does it make sense to reunite families and the fundamental right to family, but it also might even make dollars and cents long term around providing this, that when people are reunited and families can be together, this means that people are able to participate more fully in society.
And you've done, or you cited studies that show that, right? That people need less when they've got family support across the board, with money, but also emotional support, therapy, things like that.
100%. So, we present some of our work that we've done, which looks at some more of those economic numbers, but the literature is quite clear around how this relates to people's overall well-being, and it's not surprising that the opportunity to be reunited with family means that people can live their lives in ways that they don't have to be worried about loved ones as much. It makes it help them have a sense of belonging. It has all sorts of positive benefits.
Jay's report with the Red Cross outlines 4 options on how the government could deal with the backlog and achieve better long-term balance. As for Dota, Caroline says that with more than 4,000 other people in the queue, there's only one real option for saving her daughter, son-in-law, and grandchildren.
The only possible way to get here is for the Associate Minister of Immigration, who is Chris Penk, to give them a visa on humanitarian grounds, which would be perfectly possible. But he seems to have an idea that the Refugee Family Support Category is all that's required. And when people's lives are genuinely in danger, then I don't think that that's a viable approach.
Practically, how would it work? I mean, can this family get on a plane out of Yangon if they were given this visa?
I would make it happen. We'd have to make it happen. The thing is that the Tang family here in New Zealand have managed to buy themselves a house, working as cleaners. The house has 5 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, so it's perfectly capable of taking extra people, particularly since many of the older kids are now away at university. So there's space for them. These are New Zealand citizens here in New Zealand. They've made a life for themselves. They've bought a house. They've got kids who are putting themselves through university. I mean, it's a success story, and we need success stories.
That's all for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Thank you to the Tangs for sharing their story, and to Caroline Forsyth and Jay Marlowe. This episode was produced by Alexia Russell and engineered by Phil Benj. And I'm Gwen McClure. Mā te wā.